Hi, I'm Natalie Mullen, former people pleaser and queen of doing way too much, turned holistic life coach and wellness educator for purpose seeking women of color and allies. Welcome to From a Full Cup. On this podcast, I teach you how to use the 12 pillars of wellness to discover your purpose, up-level your well-being, and create the life of your dreams because we all deserve to be fulfilled, and you simply can't pour from an empty cup. Through candid conversations, insightful interviews, and motivational nuggets, you'll feel inspired, empowered, and supported as together we navigate this thing called life, holistically and with your well-being at the center. If you're committed to personal development and you're ready for more, you're in the right place. Now let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of From a Full Cup. I am so excited to have with me today Chidinma Azubuike. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Natalie. I'm so excited. Listeners, Natalie has been on my podcast and I'm here. So I'm excited to be
No,
on your
I was going to
podcast.
tell them that
I'm
first.
sorry.
I just need a moment. Chidinma doesn't know I'm doing this, but I just need to big her up. Guys, I was on her podcast, which is amazing. We're going to talk about it, I'm sure, several times throughout this podcast, but I want to talk about it first. Go listen to it. It's called,
But what
what
do
is
I
it
know?
called? But what? But what do I know? BWDIK.
Yes, ma'am.
It's I can make sure I get it right. It's amazing. It's so good, and our conversation was so good. And now we're friends, and I'm so excited to have Chidinma on today. Okay, I just had to get that out the way. And she's so gracious, and she's so kind, and she's so helpful, and all of these amazing things. Okay,
No,
so
thank you
now
so
that I've
much.
rambled, okay, please, Chidinma, introduce yourself to the listeners in your own words, and then we will get started.
Of course. Again, thank you. Thank you so much for your kind words. I feel like I love, seeing all the other like Black woman podcasts that are coming out of Toronto now. And I'm really excited because, yeah, girl, it was only a few years ago. I was looking around and I'm like, where we at? But now we're we're here and the numbers are growing. So I'm really excited. Um, for the listeners, my name is Chidinma Azubuike, as Natalie mentioned. So I am a city planner. So in the daytime, I work on like housing projects, and I know we're really concerned about affordability in the city of Toronto. So I work on that in the daytime. I'm trying to build communities, and then in my nighttime, I'm building virtual community with the podcast. So that's sort of like the link between my day and my nightlife. Yeah. So podcasting in the evening, community building in the daytime. And yeah, that's a little bit of me. And like Natalie mentioned, the podcast is What Do I Know? And yeah, go ahead and get into it. You can start with Natalie's episode and then check out all the other ones.
I like the link though between physical communities and virtual communities. That is a really cool um concept because I think a lot of times too people feel detached. They feel like their work is one thing and they have like their own personal dreams or desires or passions and they don't know how to fit it in. But you've
Mm-hmm.
found a way to bridge the gap. So I love that. And I guess we can just get started with you sharing your backstory. How did you decide that you wanted to start a virtual community, that you wanted to host your own podcast, that you wanted it to be wellness related?
Yeah, it's so funny that you mentioned the link and how you really like that, because now I'm like, oh my God, that is the link. But 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when I started the podcast, I was so confused. And I went through a whole like mini like identity crisis because I was like, oh my God, like, do I want to quit my job? Like, I feel like what I'm doing in my 9 to 5 is not matching what I want to do and what I'm doing in my evening or the rest of my life. And I want freedom and I want to be able to like just do the podcast full time. And I was looking around and everyone around me was starting businesses, especially during COVID. Everyone is an entrepreneur. I have a friend who's a hairstylist. I had friends who were doing like personal training. Like everybody was on like the entrepreneurial tip, which is very in and sexy right now. And I was just like, oh my God, like I'm on a 9 to 5 and I'm building cities and like I'm explaining to people and people are like, oh my God, that's so cool. But like, especially like the job that I was at that time, it just wasn't aligned because I wasn't doing the housing core stuff that I was doing in the other company. It was just a lot more like administrative and it wasn't what I wanted to do. So I was just so confused and I was lost. Like 2020, girl, I was just questioning. It was the year of questioning. I was questioning
Mm.
life. We were questioning, race and everything with all of that was happening with George Floyd. We were questioning health and all the systems around us. We were questioning mental health with not being able to access third spaces. And then a lot of people were also questioning like their careers, their jobs. And so that happened to me a lot. And I feel like I questioned and over questioned to the point where I was like, honestly, I think the only reason I didn't quit my job was because I have a fear of not having money. Like I'm just
That's
like
real.
I can't go broke. Like I need money. So that was really the thing that held me. Or if not for that, like if I really could have sustained it, I feel like I would have quit my job and I would have just kind of poured all I had into the podcast. So that was sort of like the premise and the context was I was very like I was questioning. I was really into radio. My mom had told me like you have a beautiful voice for radio, like and she had told me this years ago, but again, I'm an immigrant, so I didn't know what a career in radio could look like.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to school for city planning and I was supposed to do law, but I stopped at city planning because I was like, I'm done with this. So I didn't really know what a career in broadcasting could look like. But in 2020, it was bittersweet. But I think the sweet part of that whole year was that it gave us time to slow down. I
Mm-hmm.
think I was able to really slow down my life. We were working from home. Some of us are still, privileged enough to do that. Thankfully, I still am. But yeah, I was working from home and it allowed me to be able to, at 5 o'clock, close my computer, not have to commute that hour plus, and then I could take a little bit of a break for myself and then I can go work on my content. So then I was like, you know what? This is the time. Like, let me start this podcast. Let me start this podcast. And then I kind of just started connecting with a good friend who helped me with the design and logo aspect of it. And gradually it came together. And then just the story of like wanting a space to affirm, because at that time I was just so like I was confused. I also was having a little bit of imposter syndrome too because I was also new to the workplace. I was a new graduate in 2019, and then 2020 was like my first full year. So I was really feeling a lot of like, whoa, but what do I know? Like this is my first big girl job. Like I don't know what I'm doing here, and and so I really just wanted a space where it was like, okay, you don't know everything, but you know a little bit of something. So that can
Mm-hmm.
be affirmed in this space. So that was kind of like, what drove me to start in the podcast and platform.
I love that. I would never
Hmm.
have guessed that, but what an interesting story. And I'm so glad that you were able to kind of use a podcast as a way to kind of affirm what's going on for you. And I think that's
Hmm.
important because I think a lot of times, like people come to podcasting for different reasons. So some people are coming and they are coming as a thought leader or as a teacher or as an expert. Other people are coming out of a place of curiosity and they
Yep.
want to interview the experts. Other people are coming because they want to be a part of a process. Like they themselves want to heal and be in a space where other people are healing. And I think that's kind of where yours is at.
Yep.
And it can still touch on the others too. And I think that that is really powerful because it just shows different access points, right? It's different entry
Hmm.
points for podcasting. I know a lot of times I've met so many people who've said, "Oh, I want to start a podcast, but da 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 da."
Da,
And
da,
there's
da,
so many
yeah.
excuses and reasons for why either they feel like they don't have all the information or they're not an expert or they don't know what they would talk about. But there's so many different ways that you can frame a podcast to make it work for whatever you need to make it work, right? But I
Hmm.
think it's just being intentional about you don't have to stick with it. Like if you come into the space starting one way, you can evolve, you can grow, you can change your mind, you
Absolutely.
can say this is not working for me, or maybe you gravitate to something new too. So yeah, no, I really love that. And just kind of also talking about what was happening at the time in 2020, like a lot was happening. And so I can see this as just kind of being an outlet to support your own mental well-being
Yep.
in a time where the world was literally going crazy
Yep.
in all facets of
Chaos.
life. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, that's
So
exactly what it was. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So let me ask you then, especially since you were in this space of kind of, starting out a full-time career job now and maybe just not being 100% confident in what you were doing. And again, taking on all that was happening with racial tension at the time, COVID, et cetera, et cetera. How has your personal healing and wellness journey been impacted since you've started your podcast?
I feel like this might sound a little funny, but I tell my friends like this podcast is for everybody, but it's also for me because like not to say that I'm like milking and just sucking my guests dry, but I am getting like good information that feeds my
Hmm.
soul with every conversation I have with the guest on my podcast. And a lot of it is like you mentioned, out of curiosity for me. So even like I just had a guest and we were talking about like, everything from women and like our caring for our bodies and everything. And then I've had therapists on, I've had yourself, a wellness practitioner on, and I'm very much like a student of wellness. Like I'm not an expert. And I know that that was something I was like, oh my God, how am I going to talk about wellness on my podcast when I'm not a therapist? Maybe should I switch? Maybe like it'll be more aligned. But I think the conversations have been so healing for me. And it's changed a lot of my understanding. I feel like it's in a way a journal for me too, because I think I will really look back even in the episodes I did in 2020, and you can tell that my mood and where I was in life has like shifted. I feel like just in general, like it's reflective of what was going on. I was a little bit more like angry. I was figuring things out. And then now there's just joy within like it. And you can kind of get that sense even through like maybe the conversations and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I would say one, like the information I've gotten, that like the guests, the conversations are very healing. And even when I ask the guests, especially like the Black women I have, that's the majority of my guests anyway. But like when I ask the Black women on the podcast, like, how have you overcome your but what do I know moments? And they talk to me, I'm like, and they tell me their answers. I'm so inspired. And even from having certain conversations about like intergenerational trauma, intergenerational healing, I've put some of that stuff into practice in my life. Even like our conversation about like partnership, like it's just like I feel like it's legit like life lessons that I'm taking, and I'm like, oh, this is so good for my soul too. So it's definitely like, yeah, just been amazing in that aspect and regard.
And I'm so glad you did this podcast because whenever I'm listening to your podcast, and okay, I'll say one thing and then I'll go back. But
Yeah.
whenever I'm listening to your podcast, I'm always learning too. So it's nice to be a part of the learning. It's like it's a
Mm-hmm.
co-creative space, so to speak. And even
Mm-hmm.
sometimes from the guests, I see that they're kind of going through their own process. Maybe things are kind of coming to them because it's in the exchange of conversation. And this is why
Exactly.
relationships are so important when we think about well-being, because there's no point in you being an expert and you're isolated or you're siloed off. Are a
Yeah.
relational world. So the community is important, and it's in the exchange, it's in the dialogue, it's in the conversation. Little light bulbs start to go off, and you're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
actually, I never considered it in such a way before. Or, oh, you've furthered the thinking I was already feeling inside, or you've
Yeah.
reaffirmed, or you have affirmed something that was deep within me. So these conversations, when people can speak truth and speak power to you, and just kind of help you enlighten your own self, they
Yeah.
are enlightening the community. It's really an exciting experience, and it's a collective experience too, right? So
Mm-hmm.
no, I really love that, and I love being a part of that. And something I also enjoy about your podcast is that, okay, y'all, you have to go listen to it,
Yeah.
but Chid, and I'm gonna call you Chid for short.
Yeah.
That's so Chid does a really good job with her editing, and she starts off talking about music, she talks about what's happening in the city, so you just
Right.
feel so connected in a
Yeah.
different kind of way before you, like, just dive
Dive
right into the
in.
topic. And
Yeah.
I listen to quite a few podcasts, I don't think I've ever heard anybody else do anything like that, and I was like,
Right.
"This is so there's, like, a song of the week, and you have good
Yeah.
music taste, because 'cause I'm always like, "Okay." I'm, like, moving, I'm, like, sending the songs to people as if I came up with them myself, and people know I could never have found these songs on my own because I
Right.
like music, but I don't go searching
Yeah,
for it,
to
but you
go
come up with
exactly,
some
exactly.
very, very good music. So I
Yeah.
love how your podcast has its own feel to it, and I
Yeah.
really kind of appreciate it, and it's really themed at the same time around the concept of, "But what do I know?" And so
Yeah.
I just really like that. So I just let
Yeah.
you know that.
Thank
Now
you so
tell me,
much. Yeah.
what's something that's been, like, surprising that you've learned or you've encountered since starting the podcast?
Ooh, surprising? Ooh, girl, this is a good one. Okay, so I feel like s- it didn't really like surprise me, but I think a little bit surprised when I first started. I didn't know like the magnitude of like podcasts and stuff. So I think what has surprised me is just the fact that like you can be in Canada, put on a podcast, and someone in like Indonesia can be hearing it. I think that part still gets me. It's just how far your voice travels. And even if like your platform is small, like all it takes is for someone to just search up the right words on their phone and your podcast will come up and they're listening to it. Like I'm just like, I'm seeing like women in Iraq are listening, in the Middle East and
Oh,
Jamaica, Nigeria. And I'm like, oh wow, like, okay, someone is really hearing my voice. So I think that still gets to me sometimes. And I'm like, whoa, people are hearing what I'm saying. Like, and it's not even like, oh my God, people are hearing what I'm saying. Like, it's very humbling because each time I
hmm.
think about that, I remember the power of the mic and just like the power and how it travels. And I never like take any conversation for granted. But yeah, I think that would be something that's surprising. And then this is not surprising, but again, it's very humbling. It's just how like, when you're a content creator, when you're first starting, you're so optimistic. Oh my God, I'm gonna do this, it's gonna be great. And for like the first year, it's just a lot of like talking into the echo chamber a little bit. And then like guests won't take you seriously. You have
Mm.
guests come on and they don't want to like even have their camera on when they're talking to you. And so yeah, it was wild, girl. And I'm
Oh
sitting like,
no,
if this was Oprah, you would absolutely have been prepared for this.
absolutely.
Like,
Respect. Put some respect on my name in this podcast.
you know, so a lot of it was just it was a little surprising, because people talk so much about content creation and all this stuff at such a high level, but when you first start, I think some people want to hop on the train, for lack of a better word, after you've gotten some like accolades or
Hmm.
after you
Hmm.
start like sharing accomplishments and stuff. So that was a little bit like, damn, okay, but yeah.
Yeah, no, you know what? That makes sense though too, because I remember even as I'm like, I find my guests in different ways, but sometimes people will be like, oh, you don't have enough episodes. I don't want to be on your
Yeah.
show. Or
Wow. Yeah.
um, oh, how many reviews do you have? Or how many followers do you have? And they'll ask you those
Yeah.
things
And that
before they
was
even agree to be on your show. What's your social media following, etc. And I'm like,
mm,
oh, I didn't realize like all of those other things kind of factor into it. And so it's just that's been interesting for me too, because I think I was just like,
mm-hmm.
huh, I just thought people would be more open for conversations in general. But some
Yeah.
have been, and
Yeah.
in some ways, like for me, who's just very tiny and just starting out,
Yeah.
I've been very grateful to have um some people who I would say are more successful and more experienced in the podcast world who have been, such as
Mm-hmm.
yourself. So
Right. Mm-hmm.
and I that makes me feel 'cause I think that brings back the humanity of it all. Because it's like,
Yes.
okay, but just like I'm just a person who's trying to put good out there. And if you are
Mm-hmm.
aligned with good, then
You,
let's do good
yeah,
together.
exactly. And no, what you're experiencing is literally what I was experiencing and trying to be diplomatic about it. Yeah, that was exactly what I kind of went through the first year. And then I was like, okay, so some people don't like, you'd send some emails out to guests, you don't hear back. And I'm not speaking about, sometimes you get pitches to be on your podcast and you can tell that they don't listen to your podcast. I'm talking like, you pitch, you get yourself prepared, you know that you're aligned, but because you're not as big as the other podcast or as big as that expert, they feel, or a lot of times people are turning podcasts into ways to kind of now sell products and to pitch. So if they feel like, you don't have the audience for it, then it's a no. So yeah.
So what's something that you're proud of so far in this podcasting journey?
Honestly, so I am proud. Well, firstly, we just reached 100,000 downloads, so I'm really proud of that. Because my goal for this year, I was like, okay, let's see if we can hit like 40,000. Let's see if we can hit 50,000. So
Oh
to
wow.
double that, yeah. So to double that
How
in
the
in
year's not
this
even
year,
done.
I know. So to double that is wild. But also, what I'm proud of is the fact that I'm gradually finding my community and who these conversations are made for.
Mm.
Because it takes time. Like I'm 3 years in, and yes, I've reached some milestones, but I'm still figuring out ways to reach the right people, not just to reach the masses, but to reach the right people. And that's always my prayer with this podcast. It's like, like God, the same way that I'm enjoying this content and it's edifying and it's really helping people, like let it reach the right ears and let it get to the right people. Because honestly, one of my fears is going viral. Like I really don't want to go viral. And I
Mm.
don't, it's not like a thing for me. I don't really want it. And I remember when I first started this podcast, I would call my friend and I'd be like, so these are the podcasts that are getting big and that are getting the numbers. They're talking about who's dating who and who's talking about who and who's doing this. And is this what you guys want me to talk about? Cool, I'll do it then. And my friend is like, okay, first of all, that's not you. So let's not. Second of all, you're in your own lane, your own space, you're doing your own thing. They will be big. It might be for now, it might be for long, but you have content for years. You have ideas, you have things, and it's pushing us forward, and it's you have like a niche audience. So I think putting that in my mind, writing it down, and just reminding myself like this is for a particular audience. It's not necessarily for like the mainstream top 100. It's for a certain group of people that really want it, has been like really, really, really helpful. And it's something that I'm proud of, that I'm now starting to reach those people. Yeah.
I love everything about that because that shows your heart. And I think in society today, so many people are chasing clout, they're chasing followers, they're chasing fame, they're chasing accolades, all sorts of things. But when you can just follow what's in your heart and you
Mm-hmm.
can follow what you feel like you've been called to do,
Yep.
you are chasing purpose. And
Exactly.
how much more powerful is it to chase
Mm-hmm.
purpose and impact
Right.
as opposed to like who, don't get me wrong, once in a while I can get caught up in who's dating who,
Yeah,
who's
of
divorcing who. Like,
course. Of
what do you
course.
mean Jeezy's divorcing Chidinma? You know,
Chidinma,
sometimes
Iman, and
like
Tiana.
what? Right? What do you mean? But, but then like that's for a moment, but that's not changing my life because it has nothing to do with me.
Right.
You know,
Right.
yes, like that's them, right? But
Mm-hmm.
when I'm gonna hear about healing intergenerational trauma or
Yep.
like disruptive wellness or how to take care of my health as a woman, like these are things that are going to impact my well-being, they impact my day-to-day life.
Yeah.
I can use these lessons, I can teach them to other people coming up in my community as well. Like this is about impact. And I think impact is
Yes.
important. And you can't
Mm-hmm.
measure impact because let me tell you, if you impact one person, you've done your job. And
Yep.
and I have to, even with my podcast, that's always been my goal because like
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I'm not even gonna check the numbers. I don't know. That's my
Girl,
fear,
that
to
was
be
me. That
honest.
was me for like the first year and a half. I'm like, you know what? I'm not gonna check the number because I would check and I'm like, okay, all right, humbling. Not gonna check it again.
I legitimately have checked my numbers once, and the only officially once. Sometimes it's by accident, and it's kind of bad. Like I don't know, maybe this is something I need to work on because there's a way that I can type to get into my podcasting platform where the numbers just show right
Show up.
away. But I
Yeah.
deliberately type it a different way so as not to
To
see it.
get
Like I go
yeah.
through the back end,
Yeah.
and like I don't know, maybe that's weird. Maybe I need to work on it. But I'm like, I just knew for myself, I didn't want to get discouraged if I see low numbers or anything. I'm like, I just want
Yeah.
to get out the message and let me focus on, being comfortable, doing like figuring out how to even do it. And then like later on, I can, focus on growth and whatever. But I'm like, I feel like I have a message to share and things that can help
Mm-hmm.
people and make an impact. So I'm like, that's what I want to get out. And then I'll try to get it out to more of just like what you're saying, to the right people. But
Exactly.
even if one person, like, thank God
That's
for my friends, it's like they'll message me like, oh, Natalie, just listen. And I'm like, oh, okay. If it
thank you so
impacted you,
much.
I'm good. Like I'm on the
Yeah.
right track. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so important. This idea of like being okay with not going viral and not even seeking that. And if you happen to because you happen to, then fine. But
Yeah,
really just about
exactly.
chasing like the impact and purpose and like that to me is way more fulfilling for you, right? Because it's not even that you're
Absolutely.
like, oh, I have this super successful podcast. It's like, oh, I'm changing lives here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm helping people heal. I'm helping people move forward. Like
Yes.
that is to
Mm-hmm.
me so exciting. And nothing can replace that.
Mm-hmm.
Because that healing can impact, there's a ripple effect. There's a
Mm-hmm.
ripple effect. So I love that.
I'm gonna read something. This was something that was shared about our episode together.
Okay.
So that episode, I knew it was gonna be good because when you talk about like knowing when to leave situations and when to like leave, especially like relationships, jobs, and your personal story, I was like, oh, need to talk to her. But then also, I knew that other people would resonate. But I'm gonna read this. So this is from a social page called Christ and Conversations, and it says, I don't really ask people about my life and what I should be doing. This message really resonated with me. Be empowered, be yourself, don't compare what someone else is doing. Comparison is a thief of joy. Find things that fulfill you and align with your values and your vision for your life. Seeking confirmation and acceptance from others may lead you more and more into confusion and scrutiny. I personally can only speak from my lens, and it may not be yours, and that's okay. It's great to ask for perspective, but your life, your purpose, your values are really only yours, and no one else, no human being can lead you into your purpose and identity. And I think this was the timestamp here was at like the 20-minute mark. So that's when we were talking about like our purpose, your identity, what's the difference between identity and like a purpose and what that means. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just nice to see that like people are listening, they're thinking, they're like, because sometimes I know we get caught up in like engagement, like, oh my God, like, share, comment, back to what we were saying. And it's like, yeah, we're all trying to push it so that it's like, here, get some good content, get some positive conversations out there. But it's just nice to know that people are listening, and it's resonating with someone.
Yeah, I love that because everything she wrote, I'm like, yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Like she's exactly right. So
yeah,
that makes me feel so good. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah.
And
No worries.
again, like that's what it's about. It's about like having conversations that make people think, that make people reflect. And for my own self, just like you, I am always reflecting as I'm saying things. Even my
Mm-hmm.
solo episodes, I'm like healing myself as I'm talking, and I'm like
Yeah.
considering things, and I'm like, okay, okay, because as I share a tip, it's like I'm practicing that for myself too. So, um, it's just really exciting to kind of have this creative space that can be a healing space and an affirming space at the same, and a fun space.
Mm-hmm.
Like I find it fun. I enjoy it
Exactly.
too.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
and I think the unexpected part for me was like that I would actually make connections with people, and it's like these interviews are maybe half an hour, but then you're like, you feel like you've been friends with this person for so
For
long. You're like,
for
wow,
years. And I'm like, oh
like
wow, I love this. Come back.
it's nice. It brings you, it makes you connected to people that otherwise maybe you would never have been connected to. So super
Yeah.
exciting. And so, okay, because you do this on the side, but you still have your
Yeah.
full-time job, you still have your 9 to 5 job. And so a
Yeah.
lot of people want to do something and they are worried about how to balance, how do I manage a side hustle when I still have a full-time job? And so I want you to share a little bit more about that. Like how has
Mhm.
that journey been for you, and maybe some strategies that have helped you along that way?
Right. So I would say, the first thing is if you want to start a side hustle, whether it's, creative, like content creation or like a product business or whatever, I think it's always important to ask yourself why, because that way, when you know the why, it also kind of helps you know how much effort and time you want to allocate to that. If your why is I want this to just relieve stress, then perhaps it shouldn't be taking 20 hours of your week if you want it to relieve stress, right? Versus if your why is like, I want this to be my full time job one day, or I want this to be a source of income, then knowing that why, that will help you out on the days when it's tough and you're like, oh my God, why am I doing this again? Then you remember, okay, I'm doing this because there's a brighter future, but keeps you going. So I
Mhm.
think it's important to really know your why. And for me, my why has sort of changed. Like I think when I first started, I was really like, okay, like hopefully this grows and I do this and I do this and I do this. And then I was like, you know what? Nah, like I'm gonna keep putting out quality content out there. I'm gonna keep building a community one day at a time. And I don't really know, like I know the why in terms of that it's to build community, to put out quality content, and to sustain a virtual platform for Black and women of color. But beyond that, I don't really know. And I'm okay with that for now because it leaves a little bit of pressure, especially because I'm privileged enough that I'm not dependent on it for money. So it's okay. So I think, yeah, like it's important to know your why. And then that way you're able to set boundaries and set a sustainable schedule for yourself. So for me, I know that like I put out episodes every other week. I cannot put out a weekly episode because it's really just me. And I think I have a videographer that I use sometimes when I'm doing in-person episodes, which I rarely do. And then I have a friend who, helps me here and there with like social media, but it's really still just me. So I can't record, edit, prepare the content to be shareable on social media, all the clips, all the posts, the captions, and post every single week. That's a lot for
Mhm.
me. So I've
Mhm.
created a schedule that works for me. I've also set boundaries for myself, it has also to a certain extent not really affected, but it's also shaped like my social life because if I work 9 to 5, then some of my evenings I'm working out or, I'm doing Pilates, I'm at the gym. And then, maybe I'm not able to edit during the weekdays. That means now I'm editing on the weekends, or like I'm editing maybe
Mm,
Saturday morning or Saturday night, depending on how I feel. It then means maybe I'm not out partying. Maybe I'm missing one or two brunches here and there. I'm not sacrificing my social life. Like I'm still gonna meet up with my girls and we're still,
mhm.
do what we have to do. And I'm still trying to sustain different relationships and friendships in my life, but it's something to be aware of because I think entrepreneurship or side hustles are made to look sexy. But then when you start, there will be times where it's like, ooh, okay, it's this or that. Which one will it
Mhm.
be this week? So
Yeah,
yeah, that's just sort of what it is. So I think, yeah, knowing your why, um setting sort of like boundaries and schedules that are sustainable. Like again, if you know that you cannot be posting and you cannot be doing content creation every single day, then pace yourself. Like if, especially if it's your first year, okay, maybe I'm going to start by posting 3 times a week. If it's a podcast, maybe once a month, and then work your way up to bi-weekly and then weekly if you have a team or something. But just it needs to be sustainable because then we get into things like burnout and all that stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that that's so important to say, because passion is not what sustains you. Because you can be
Mm.
passionate about something, I really care about it, but there just comes a point where it literally goes down to your why and resilience. Because
Yep.
there are times where you're just like, I don't want, like, how do I undo? Like, I'm sure a lot of people are like, I changed my mind. Like, how do I get out of this? And it just
Yeah.
comes in different seasons, different moments, especially when life is lifing on top of the responsibility, right? Because it's like, yeah, you could have a schedule for yourself where it's like, okay, I'm gonna record every 2 weeks, I'm gonna upload whatever, or
Yeah.
every other week. But then it's like, let's just say you get sick, or something happens
Exactly.
in your family, or something happens in society, right? Like those things can
Mhm.
also still come and impact. And so even for myself, like I'm kind of thinking it through and I'm like, maybe I'm gonna make some change. I don't know why, but like I don't have official seasons, but I've kind of already told myself December is gonna be a pause. I just feel
Mhm.
like the world should pause in December. By like the holiday season, I just feel like should be a natural pause. So I know I'm taking a minimum of 2 weeks off, if not the whole month. And I'm gonna use that time to say, like, are there changes I want to make for next year? I kind of thought about the podcast without thinking about the social media aspect of the podcast. And then
Girl.
I was like, oh, reels. Oh, but it's okay. And you learn slowly. And like the
Mhm.
way you market your podcast is so beautiful. And I'm learning so much just
Mhm.
observing your page, and
Right.
you get ideas from other people. And again,
Of
you have to know what
course.
you can and can't do. You have to remain true to yourself too at the end of the day, and true to your skill set, and true to how you want to show up, and what you have the capacity to do at the time.
Girl.
Like
Capacity.
capacity,
Capacity to introduce yourself. Like for example,
capacity.
yeah, for example, what you said, like the pause in December. So that I do that as well. Like I kind of have like official season. So my seasons will go from March to December. So I at December, like mid-December, like December 15th, last episode goes out, sometimes a little earlier, and then I have this the rest of December to rest and not think about the podcast, and then I have January and February to start like pre-recording episodes for the season, at least get a few, under my belt. So that is just a matter of like editing. And then it just also allows you to think and recharge that creativity. Like I feel like because it's unfortunate that everything is so like marketable content profit, it really like affects the way that people are able to sit down and think about the quality of things that they've been putting out. So yeah, definitely give yourself that break
I'm
too.
like, maybe March to December. I'm like, let me sit with that in my spirit, because that
Yeah.
sounds how that sounds. So I'm gonna have to consider it for myself. But like, and that's what everybody has to do. They have to see like, but sometimes you just need that pause so that you have space
Space,
to
yeah.
then consider, like, this mental space. I don't think we talk about that a lot, but we just keep going, 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 and
Right.
we push ourselves and we push ourselves. But sometimes you run ragged, or it's like stale. It's like you don't have like a freshness of ideas because you didn't allow space for that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really good to just, yeah, create that pause, and kind of go from there. And funny enough, we're talking about pauses, and you taught me a new phrase, and I'm a teacher, so I what teachers do not know at all. I always tell my students that, like, I don't know, guys. But you taught me a new phrase, which was about liminal journey. And I remember when you wrote that, I was like, what is she talking about? I had to go Google that right quick. So can you explain to the listeners what is a liminal journey and
Yeah.
how do you connect with that concept?
Yeah, so I think it was, yeah, liminal journey, or the more
Or liminal
specific term,
space.
liminal space. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
I just read it. I
Yeah.
was like, I don't think that was what she said.
Yeah. No, it's
Liminal
okay.
space, my
Yeah.
bad.
And when I heard it from a podcast. So shout out to the podcast that would be educating for real, because yeah, that's where I picked that term up and I was like, oh, this is exactly where I'm at. And so, for listeners, it's essentially just sort of when you're in that in between transition space of like where you've been and where you're going. So, for example, maybe you recently quit a job or you got fired. So you're in that space of like, I left the job, I'm not there. Where am I going? Maybe you left a relationship, a friendship, you're pivoting your career. And that space is where it's really where you have to like sit. It's where you have a lot of questioning. It's where some doubt, some fear may come in, but it's also where you have the opportunity to like reflect, think on what went wrong for the previous situation. So like previously, like I switched jobs and I was saying like in that time period of like, not really working, I was reflecting. I was like, okay, like these are the things I didn't like my previous position. How do I switch that? How do I factor that in even as I'm applying for jobs so that I know that I'm not just taking anything I get. How do I factor what type of a vision I have for my life, like where I'm able to do my 9 to 5 and do my side hustle and not be burnt out? What does that look like for me? And that allowed me to like be more confident as I was applying. Now I'm a lot more like just I'm really prioritizing that like work-life balance. And like the week before my past vacation, it was slacking a little bit and I had to say, no, no, there's a reason that we're setting these boundaries. Don't let them think that you can work 3 hours extra every day. No, 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 not gonna happen. Go back. So I think, yeah, those spaces are kind of like those transition periods that you're like, whoa, where am I going? But I think that's where a lot of like the planning, thinking, reflecting really can like propel you for like where you're going. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. And like even for myself, I mean, I've been in liminal spaces in different at different times of life. Actually, I'm in one right now
Mm-hmm.
that I'm trying to figure out, but I gotta sit with it for a while. Sometimes you just have to sit with something for a while and you have to really contemplate and figure out your next steps. Um, but before when I was going through a marriage separation, like that was a very difficult liminal space.
Yeah.
But the good thing about that is that as you said, you have that time to sit and say, well, what do I want like going forward?
Mm-hmm.
What changes would I make? What aligns with me? What do I even need? Like, what do I not need? And so it really allows you to ask yourself questions that when you're in deep in something, you don't have time to ask, right? Like when you're
Yeah.
working every day, you don't have the mental space to say, well, what kind of different job would I want or have? It's harder. But if you
Yeah.
get opportunity for a liminal space, and not everybody sees it as an opportunity, but I would encourage you and challenge you to see it as, okay, let me use this time and space productively.
Yeah.
How can I get to the next version of myself, to the next step on my journey, the next rung on my ladder, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
and so that you're always moving forward and
Yep.
not backwards. Like that's one thing about me. I'm forward driven, and now sometimes life throws you curveballs, and it might set you back
Girl.
in some ways.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I would know, trust me. But even though you're set back in some ways, you can still be moving forward in other ways. And so I
Yeah.
just want to send that encouragement. If anyone's listening and you feel like, listen, life has thrown me a whole boulder and it's rolled you over and you're going all the way back, in
Yeah.
some way that experience is still helping you to move forward in another area of life, even if you don't see it
See
yet.
it.
So
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, you honestly, like, I think in summation, it would really just be like you said, like just sitting and like thinking about it. I really think those are the times where we need to just be kind of like quiet. And I don't mean
mhm.
like quiet as in not talking, but when you like just retreat and be a little bit still.
Yeah.
And those periods, like those, you might look like you taking a walk, it might look like you listening to soul music or gospel or praying a little bit more than you were. However,
Yeah.
you're kind of drawn to doing that in a healthy way, do it. So
And even journaling is good. And I
yes.
would call this like the winter season. It's a
Yeah,
time, if we think about
absolutely.
life and we like, life is cyclical, and just like the seasons, we have 4 seasons. There sometimes comes seasons in life where
Yeah.
everything seems to have died. Like, it just seems like everything's come to a standstill and everything's in
Yeah.
hibernation.
Mhm.
But we know that spring is coming and then summer.
Mhm.
So use that winter space as a pause, because let me tell you, when it is winter outside, I am in.
Me
Okay.
too.
I
Mhm.
don't do I don't do that. Mm-mm. So just even how the animals go and they hibernate and the birds disappear, and they go do what they
Yeah.
need to do. If you are in life in a space that feels like that winter season, it feels like everything has died and everything is still, use it to your advantage. And as you said, retreat, like, even if you spend more time with yourself and just dig deeper and like look inward and just ask
Mhm.
yourself, like, what is going on? What am I feeling? And really have those conversations, because just think about it in life. In the summer, the summer's just passed now, and everybody's like, oh my God, summer was so busy. I was doing this, and that.
Right.
Right? So sometimes life is like that, and you're just doing so much you can't even pause to think. But in
Yeah.
winter, listen, I have
You
never heard
can.
anybody saying their winter is turned up and they were out every weekend. I don't know those
Mhm.
people.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a natural pause. So we should invite those natural pauses into our life as well. It's
Yeah.
healthy. It's just
Absolutely.
healthy, and then it allows us to see, what do we need to cut off and leave in winter, and what are we taking forward with us into the spring season. So
Mhm.
we can be curators of our life, so to speak, too, and just be tweaking things according to the seasons. Um,
Yeah. That's a really good
so
way
this
to
has
look at
been,
it.
sometimes this is why we have the conversations, right? So
Mhm.
we learn and we grow
Yeah.
together. And, before we close on this show, one of the primary aims is to encourage women to prioritize their well being, to pour back into themselves, to fill their cups, and just to honor their needs and have open conversations about wellness. And so as a wellness coach for myself, I see lots of women who sometimes are struggling in different areas and they feel like they're alone, and it's not true. And so I'm curious, for you as an entrepreneur who also has a full-time job and is doing other things, have you ever gone through a challenge that's impacted your well-being? And if so, what is a strategy that has helped you?
Ooh, that's a good one. So I think burnout for sure was real, and that's why, like, when I talked about setting the boundaries and all that stuff, I had to. Um, it was as a result of burnout. Like, I was just doing a lot of things, and I was tired, and I was just like, I can't do this anymore. So I think burnout was one. I'm not exactly sure if there's a direct word for this issue, but like not lack of a vision, but lack of clarity. Like, I just like,
Mhm,
where am I going? I think that's something that I really have been like just navigating the past couple of years. So lack of clarity, burnout, just, like, where, like, finding my purpose, like a lot of just, meta like life stuff I've been kind of like just
mhm,
working through with the business and my work. And then at the same time it's like, okay, so how do I now balance? And I that's why this is also a reason why I really related to our conversation, because now I'm in a relationship and I'm like, oh my God, I have to navigate having a whole man and having a whole job and having a whole podcast and having friends and having like my family. It's just like, what? And I'm
a lot.
one girl, everyone. Hello, one girl. So
Everybody's tugging at you.
yeah. So it's like, and then at some point it's like, oh, we need to spend some more time together. And I'm like, huh? You're cutting into my editing time. And then it's like, it's just,
You're
it's
like,
a, yeah.
I could give you 15 minutes.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, hey, Jay, like, you want to come out for brunch? It's like, okay. So the opportunity cost of me being at brunch means that I'm not doing laundry. I'm not working on my. Okay, I'll come do brunch today, but that means, girl, I'm not going to see you for maybe 2 weeks. And then, so
Mhm,
yeah, just a lot. That has been like what I've been struggling with. And I think I also like, I'm a recovering perfectionist. And then when I get something wrong, it really kills me and it eats at me. So then I had a period where I was just dropping a lot of balls and I was just not like coming through for people. And then that was also hurting me because I'm like, guys, I'm tired. Like, I don't know what to tell you, but And so I think what has really helped me is I've had to clearly like communicate. Like, I know that that sounds communicate, but I've had to like I've had to sit down and actually communicate, like, my relationship with my partner, like, hey, like, these are things that are important to me right now, and this is where we're at, and we're also both in our hustling phase. So it just has to be a thing of like, okay, we're gonna have to communicate better. We're gonna have to make sure that we're prioritizing time for each other amidst our hustle. But if I'm not answering, it's because I'm either doing this or I'm doing that, and like this is why. And I've had to do that with my friends. Like my girls know, like Chid is really taking this podcast and things seriously. We might see her like a couple of times a month, but this is not like an everyday after work drinks type situation. Like, yeah, it's just not going to be that. So I've had to kind of like communicate to everybody, kind of set some boundaries, and then also even amidst that, set time for myself. So yeah, I've set boundaries for other people. I've put alone time, because what would happen sometimes is you do your 9 to 5, then you do your 5 to 9, and then now you're only left with maybe like the hour of like 9 to 11 to really like do what you want to do, and then you have to sleep and then wake up and do it all over again. So I've
Yeah.
had to like schedule time for the weekends to get back on my health, because I also was not really taking care of myself. I wasn't like, I was eating right just by virtue of the household I grew up in, but I wasn't really working out. I wasn't, so now I'm like, okay, I have to make time for these things. I have to make time for myself. I set boundaries for other people, communicated in different relationships. Honestly, gotten better at saying no, because I was that person that would say yes to a lot of things just to try to like help everybody. But now I just, if I can't do it, I'm gonna look at you and say, listen, I would really love to help you, but I just cannot. So that, and then also being okay to ask for help. Yeah, like I'm getting better asking for help. It's hard these days because I think that, if I'm asking people for help, especially with the podcast and the brand, I want to be able to put something in your pocket. But and so what I might do is, hey, if I can only pay you to help me do this on an as needed basis, then we'll do that. I don't necessarily have to pay you on a month to month basis. So that too has really helped. So those are a few things that I'm like trying out that have really helped me,
No,
because
that was a lot, but that was so real, and I
yeah.
appreciate you kind of being so open, and I think the listeners can definitely relate with what you're saying and resonate.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's just the intention of saying, what can I do in this moment to honor my needs? Am I
Yeah.
checking in with myself? Do I need to
Yeah.
make those tweaks? Like, I'm not sure that there's a perfect system out there that's like, okay, well, now you've got it all compartmentalized and it's going to be perfectly weighted. When I think
Mm-hmm.
of like even work-life balance, I never think of it as like, okay, it's 50% here, 50% there. I just think of it kind of as like, we're just trying to figure out how to hold everything up. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
not drop any one ball. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like a fluid thing. It's going to be different. The needs are going to be different. There's going to be different seasons and different times where it's like you need to spend more time with certain people and then less time with others. And
Yep.
I remember my friends, they're like, we were planning like these girls dinners, and they're like, okay, so once a month. And I was like, nope, I can do every other month. Like
Yeah,
I'm in multiple friend groups, right? So I'm like,
exactly.
I
The
can't,
multiple
some
friend
people are
groups will
just in like
get you.
it will get, let me tell you, because people have like one core group, and if you do, like, life is easy, right? But when you're in multiple groups and then people are in multiple cities now, right? Like first
Girl.
time it's like everybody I knew was in Mississauga for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's like I'm trying to plan with my friend who's in Ajax, plan with my sister who's in
Yep.
Stony Creek. Like this is a lot of distance
Yep.
to cover.
Mm-hmm.
Um and different ways you want to connect with people too. So there's just, and again, if you have your own interests on the side too, it is
Yeah,
still important to do things that are going to be joy. You don't want to spend your whole time living for other people, whether for your employer,
exactly.
whether for
Oh,
your
for your own
partner, whether
business.
for your
Yeah.
family. You've got to
Mm-hmm.
live for yourself too.
Yep.
And not just in terms of self-care, in terms of working out, eating well. Do things that are actually joyful for you. Like
Mm.
take the walk because you enjoy
Joy.
nature, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
do like whatever it is. If you do podcasting and you truly enjoy it, then great,
Mm-hmm.
but just find other ways to kind of be connected to your own self and just have nobody else there. Like now, I know it sounds weird, but like I was like for Mother's Day, I'm like, I just want to be by myself. Like, hotel. I told my husband, I was like,
Yeah.
I want to go to a hotel by myself,
Yeah.
and I don't want to see
Yeah.
anybody.
Staycation.
And
Exactly. That's it.
I'll celebrate with you guys tomorrow,
Yeah.
but I just want that time for myself because I think that we don't get to spend a lot of time with ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
just because of the nature of society, and different
Yep.
societies are different, but Western society, North American society, we really have to be more conscious and intentional to choose that time for ourselves. Because in
Yeah.
other countries around the world, man, life is slower and you have an easier balance.
Yeah.
But something about good old
North
Canada, love
America?
Canada.
Oof.
North America, it's a little different. So you got to be intentional. But
Yeah.
anyways, this has been such a good conversation, Chid. I know we could go on and on forever, but we'll just have to come back for part two.
Of
Please
course.
tell the
Yes.
listeners, how can they find you? Tell them, plug your podcast again, and anything else
Yes.
that you want to share with us.
For sure. So yes, if if you're listening and you're like, oh, I want to listen to the podcast, Chid, for sure, check out But What Do I Know podcast on, any streaming platform where listen to your podcast. You can also find us on Instagram at BWDIK podcast and also on X it's being called now, but we're most active on Instagram. That's where you can find like, BTS, you can find reels, all that sort of like behind the scenes stuff. You can find all that stuff there. And then if you're on Apple, Spotify, Google, whatever, you can find the audio podcast as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yes, and all of those links will be in the show notes, so go check them
Yes.
out. And like side note, Google Podcast is becoming YouTube Music.
YouTube. Yes.
Make
Yeah,
it make sense.
yeah. I know.
Anyways, on that note, my friends and listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, continue to serve yourself, your loved ones, and your communities from a full cup.